There was once a small valley cradled between two ancient mountain ranges. From afar, it looked like a bowl of gold at sunrise, fields of wheat swaying in harmony, rivers glimmering like veins of silver, and homes scattered like humble stars upon the green. It was a peaceful place, untouched by war, bound by simplicity. Yet even peace, if held too long, can hide its own restlessness. In this valley lived a young woman named Lyra. To those who knew her, she was kind, graceful, and endlessly thoughtful, a person who noticed the little things others missed, the trembling of a leaf before rain, the sigh of the wind across the rooftops, the way dusk painted the hills in layers of violet and gray. But beneath that gentleness was something else, something she could not name, a fear, a quiet gnawing fear of the dark. When the sun dipped beyond the hills each evening, Lyra's heart would tighten. As the villagers returned to their homes and the night wrapped the valley in silence, she would rush to light her candles, dozens of them. She filled her cottage with flickering flames until the shadows had nowhere left to hide. Yet even surrounded by light, her unease grew stronger. The dance of the flames seemed to whisper, "You cannot keep us burning forever." She told herself it was childish. She was grown now. She could read, trade at the market, mend her clothes, and work her small garden. But when the night came and the wind slipped through the cracks of her window, she would sit awake, heart pounding, waiting for dawn as if the light itself were a promise that she might disappear without it. Sometimes, she dreamed that her candles melted into rivers of wax that flooded her home, drowning her in light that could not comfort her. Other nights, she imagined her fear as a living shadow, standing quietly at her back, patient, waiting. Her neighbors never understood. "Why so many candles, Lyra?" Old Marin would chuckle. "Are you planning to light the moon itself?" Lyra would smile, but her laugh was thin. "I just like the glow," she would say. Inside, she knew it wasn't love of light, it was the terror of losing it. One evening, as twilight spread across the valley, Lyra stood outside her cottage and watched the sun slip away. The horizon flamed in gold, then crimson, then faded to indigo. The first star appeared, a small, trembling dot. The air smelled of earth and pine. A cool wind brushed her face, and for a moment, she didn't move. The beauty of it all almost eased her fear. But as the shadows deepened, her pulse began to race again. She hurried back inside and struck a match. The hiss of fire comforted her. One by one, candles bloomed across her home like small suns. She sat beside the window, watching their reflections dance across the glass. Outside, the world had fallen silent, only the occasional cry of an owl and the rustle of distant trees. Yet the silence did not calm her. It pressed against her chest. She longed to understand why darkness frightened her so deeply, but no answer ever came. She only knew that it always had, ever since she was a child, when a storm once blew out the lamps, and she had felt, for a single endless moment, that the world had vanished. Years passed, and her fear grew heavier. The villagers began to speak of her with gentle pity. "She's kind but strange," they said. Afraid of her own shadow, Lyra tried to ignore their words, but deep down, she knew they were right. She wasn't just afraid of the dark, she was afraid of herself, of what she might find if she ever faced that silence without a single flame between her and the night. And so she lived each day waiting for sunrise, and each night chasing away the dark, until one evening, something changed. A traveler arrived in the valley, an old man with eyes like polished stone and a calmness that seemed to silence even the wind. He came from the mountains to trade herbs and told stories to anyone who would listen. When someone asked him about his journeys, he spoke of a hermit who lived in the heart of a mountain cave, a man who had not seen sunlight in years yet could see more clearly than anyone beneath the sun. Lyra listened, her heart thudding softly. The idea of someone who could see in darkness both frightened and fascinated her. That night, she lit her candles as usual, but this time, their glow felt smaller. The shadows beyond the flames seemed to whisper a question she could no longer ignore. "If someone can see in the dark, then what have you been afraid of all this time?" The next morning dawned silver and still. Mist rolled across the fields like slow rivers, curling around the cottages and drifting up toward the hills. Lyra stood at her door, a shawl around her shoulders, staring toward the distant peaks where the traveler had said the hermit lived. The mountains looked ancient, immense backs of sleeping giants, their crowns lost in cloud and mystery. She couldn't shake the traveler's words from her mind. A man who could see without light, a man who lived in darkness and called it peace. All day she worked in her small garden, but her thoughts wandered. As she cut herbs or watered the soil, her mind drifted to the cave, to what kind of person would choose to live surrounded by eternal night. Was he blind, or had he found some secret sight that others lacked? When evening came and the first stars shimmered above the horizon, she lit her candles as usual. Their warm glow painted her home in gold, but for the first time, she noticed how restless the flames looked. Each one swayed and bent, trying to survive the invisible breath of the night. And she wondered if the hermit lived without this trembling light. Perhaps he had found something steadier, something that did not flicker. That thought followed her into sleep. She dreamed she stood in a cave of pure shadow. The air was cool and soft, like a velvet curtain around her skin. Somewhere deeper inside, a faint heartbeat echoed not her own, but the pulse of the mountain itself. A single voice, calm and patient, spoke in the dark. You light too many candles, child. Every flame blinds you to what already shines. She woke before dawn, her heart pounding and her room filled with smoke. A candle had burned itself out, its wick drowned in wax. The air smelled bitter. For the first time, she felt angry not at the dark, but at her dependence on light. That morning, as she carried water from the well, she found the traveler again sitting by the village gate, chewing on a piece of bark. His donkey grazed nearby, laden with bundles of herbs. Lyra approached him slowly. Old traveler, she said, her voice steady but curious. Yesterday, you spoke of a hermit in the mountains. Who is he really? The man squinted at her. His eyes were clouded, yet piercing. Ah, the one who lives in the cave, he murmured. Some call him mad, some call him enlightened. I call him free. She repeated, he lives in darkness. He smiled faintly. And yet he sees more than we who live in light. Lyra hesitated. Do you know how to reach him? The old man tilted his head, studying her. It's a hard climb. The mountain tests every traveler. But if your heart seeks silence, you'll find the way. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his attention had drifted to his donkey. When she looked back, he was humming softly, a tune so quiet she could barely hear it. Something about it made her chest tighten. A strange calm filled her, not comfort, but calling. That night, she made her decision. She packed a small bundle, bread, dried fruit, a flask of water, a wool blanket, and one candle, only one. Then she sat before her window and wrote a note for her neighbors. I am going to seek the light that does not burn. Before sunrise, she stepped outside. The sky was painted in deep violet and gray, the last star fading behind the mountain's shoulder. The valley was silent, except for the faint song of waking birds. For a long moment, Lyra looked back at her cottage, its windows dark, its candles unlit. The sight made her heart tremble, but she did not turn back. As she walked through the fields, dew clung to her feet like pearls. The air grew colder as she neared the base of the mountain. The path ahead wound through thick forests and steep ridges, unknown territory for her. Yet with each step, she felt something stirring inside, like a forgotten memory rising to the surface. By midday, she reached the foothills. The sun had climbed high, but its warmth could not soften the growing chill. The trees here were tall and ancient, their branches weaving a canopy so dense that daylight filtered through in faint, shifting beams. It felt like walking beneath a great cathedral made of wood and wind. At a stream's edge, she stopped to rest. The water ran clear and cold. She cupped her hands to drink, and for a brief moment, she saw her reflection ripple, half in light, half in shadow. And in that shifting mirror, she thought she saw another face, calm, silent, and watching. She blinked, and it was gone. That night, she found shelter under a rocky ledge. The air smelled of moss and rain. She lit her single candle and watched its small flame flutter against the vast, black mountain. She could hear the forest whispering, leaves brushing, distant howls, the crackle of unseen life. For the first time, the sounds didn't frighten her. They were simply there, as if the night itself were breathing. She sat beside the candle until her eyelids grew heavy. Just before sleep claimed her, she thought she heard a voice in the wind, low and gentle, almost like a lullaby. Do not run from the dark. Walk until it knows your name. And for the first time in her life, Lyra did not wake in fear when the candle died. She slept, cradled by the mountain's shadow. The forest deepened as Lyra walked, hour after hour, her footsteps sinking into a carpet of fallen leaves. Each step seemed to take her further not only from the valley, but from the person she had always been. The light above dimmed as the trees grew denser, towering pillars of cedar and pine, their tops lost in mist. The air grew cool, the scent of earth and moss thick and ancient. For a long while, she heard only her own breath and the rhythmic whisper of her sandals brushing against the ground. Then came the mountain's own voice, the faint creak of wood, the trickle of unseen streams, and the distant cry of eagles wheeling overhead. Every sound echoed differently here. The forest seemed alive, listening. She began to feel that each movement, each breath, each heartbeat was being observed, not with judgment, but with quiet awareness. Lyra stopped by a fallen log and rested her hands on its rough bark. Tiny insects darted in and out of the cracks, carrying pieces of leaves, building unseen homes. The sight made her smile faintly. Even in the dark, she murmured, everything still works, still lives. She continued climbing. By midday, clouds began to gather. The sunlight that had trickled through the trees vanished as the sky turned gray. A chill wind blew through the branches, and the forest seemed to whisper secrets in a tongue she could not understand. Soon, rain began to fall, not a storm, but a slow, deliberate drizzle that soaked her hair and clothes. The path turned slippery, mud clinging to her sandals, yet she pressed on, guided by the faint trail that wound upward like a thread spun by fate. As she climbed, the world grew quieter, the sound of the valley fading behind her. When the rain stopped, a pale mist rose from the ground, curling around her legs. It felt as if she were walking through a dream. Hours passed, her legs ached, her throat burned, and her candle, wrapped carefully in cloth, felt heavier than before. The mountain loomed ahead, vast and unmoving, as if waiting for her to prove her intent. At last, she reached a clearing, a wide plateau where the forest ended and bare stone began. The wind here was sharp and clean, tasting faintly of ice. She looked down and saw the entire valley spread out beneath her, a patchwork of fields and rooftops. From this height, her village looked impossibly small, her life down there even smaller. For a long moment, she stood in silence, caught between awe and ache. She realized how far she had come and how far she still had to go. Then she turned toward the path that led higher, toward the shadowed mouth of the mountain. The ascent was steeper now. The soil gave way to rock. Her sandals scraped against stone. Once her foot slipped, and she caught herself against a jagged ledge, her palms scraping open. A thin line of blood trickled down, mixing with rainwater. She watched it for a moment, the bright red against the gray rock, then wiped her hand on her skirt and kept climbing. As the sun began to sink, a strange stillness fell. The wind died. The sky darkened faster than usual, and the first hint of twilight filled the air. Lyra found a small hollow between boulders and stopped to rest. She unwrapped her bundle, ate a piece of bread, and drank sparingly from her flask. When she leaned back and closed her eyes, she could feel the heartbeat of the mountain beneath her, deep, slow, eternal. It pulsed faintly through the rock, reminding her of her dream. The mountain breathes, she thought, and I am inside its breath. A rustle behind her made her open her eyes. A fox stood a few paces away, watching her. Its fur glowed faintly orange in the dim light, and its eyes reflected the last shimmer of dusk. For a moment, neither moved. Then the fox tilted its head, as if acknowledging her, and vanished into the mist. Lyra smiled to herself. "You live here without fear," she whispered. "Perhaps I can too." When night came, she lit her candle. Its small flame struggled against the wind, casting trembling shadows across the rocks. She cupped her hand around it, protecting the fragile light. The memory of her bright cottage returned, how she had filled it with dozens of candles. But here, in the vast silence of the mountain, this single flame felt more alive than all those hundreds ever had. She watched the light flicker across her fingers. Its warmth touched her face gently, as if reminding her she was still human, still searching. The wind began to rise again, whispering through the cliffs, carrying faint sounds that almost resembled words. She listened carefully, thinking she heard a voice, not from the outside, but from somewhere within her. Each step is not away from light, but toward it. The voice faded with the wind. Lyra drew her cloak tighter and continued the climb. Hours passed in a blur of effort and breath. Her muscles trembled, her feet ached, but something deeper than willpower drove her onward, a quiet yearning that felt older than her fear. Near midnight, she reached a ridge where the path vanished into solid stone. Ahead of her, the mountain rose like a black wall, its face cracked and streaked with veins of quartz that shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and that hidden behind a curtain of ivy and moss. She saw a narrow opening, the entrance to the cave. She stood motionless, staring into the darkness. The air that flowed from within was cold and still, carrying a scent of stone and time. It was as if the mountain itself was exhaling secrets. Her heart pounded. This was it, the place she had sought, the place she had feared. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the candle in her pack. She lit it with a match, the tiny flame bursting to life, fragile yet defiant. For a moment, it illuminated the cave's threshold, the rough walls, the scattered pebbles, the unseen depth beyond. The unseen depth beyond. She took one slow step forward. The sound of her foot echoed softly in the hollow space, fading into a silence so complete it seemed to swallow the world. Lyra turned once more toward the valley below. The moon hung low, bathing the world in silver. The village, her home, her fears, all lay far beneath her now. She whispered to herself, voice trembling but clear. If the darkness is waiting for me, then I will go and meet it. And with that, Lyra entered the mountain. The candle flame wavered once, then steadied, guiding her deeper into the unknown. The cave swallowed her footsteps. Each sound, the scrape of her sandals, the faint rustle of her cloak seemed magnified, carried through the hollow dark like ripples on still water. The candle in her hand glowed softly, casting a golden halo that reached only a few paces ahead. Beyond that circle, there was nothing, no color, no form, only blackness, thick as silk. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. Even the mountain's wind faded until there was only the soft crackle of the candle's flame and her own heartbeat. It was not silence, it was presence, a kind of listening vastness that made her every movement feel sacred. The air grew colder. The walls began to shimmer faintly with moisture, and drops of water fell from the ceiling at slow, deliberate intervals. Each drop echoed a sound both lonely and peaceful, like the ticking of eternity. After a long while, Lyra began to wonder if the hermit was only a story, a dream conjured by her restless mind. Her candle had burned halfway down, wax dripping onto her fingers, warm against the chill. Just as doubt began to rise, she saw something ahead, a faint glow, steadier and cooler than her own flame. That it wasn't fire. It was something softer, like moonlight reflected on water. Lyra approached slowly. The tunnel widened into a vast chamber, a natural cathedral carved by centuries of breath and time. Stalactites hung like frozen bells, and the ground was smooth as glass. At the center of this great hollow sat an old man in perfect stillness. He was cross-legged upon a flat stone, wrapped in simple grey robes. A single bowl rested before him. His eyes were closed, his face lined with years, yet strangely youthful, illuminated by that pale glow that seemed to come not from any light source, but from the air around him. Lyra hesitated at the edge of the chamber, unsure if she should speak, but the hermit's voice came first, soft, clear, and impossibly calm. You have come a long way to find what was never lost. His eyes opened. They were deep and steady, like still water under starlight. Lyra bowed instinctively. Master, she said, her voice trembling with both exhaustion and awe. I have come seeking peace, and the light that does not burn. The hermit smiled faintly. Peace, he echoed, as if tasting the word. Tell me, child, what is it you wish to find peace from? She lowered her gaze. From the darkness, from fear. All my life I've been afraid of night, of the things I cannot see. He tilted his head slightly. And yet you've come to the darkest place of all. Lyra swallowed. Because I was tired of running from it. The hermit's smile deepened. Then perhaps you are ready to see what cannot be seen. He rose slowly to his feet. His movements were deliberate, weightless. He gestured for her to follow as he walked to a stone basin carved into the floor. It was filled to the brim with water, so still it seemed solid. The faint light reflected off it like a second moon. The hermit picked up a small clay bowl from beside the basin and held it out to her. Take this, he said. Empty the basin without spilling a single drop. Lyra frowned, confused. How can I? This bowl is too small. He only nodded. Then learn how to make it enough. She knelt beside the basin, dipping the bowl into the water. The surface rippled, breaking the perfect reflection. She lifted it carefully and poured the water aside. Again and again, she repeated the task, but the basin never seemed to empty. The more she tried, the more restless her movements became. The candle beside her flickered violently, as if echoing her frustration. At last, she stopped, her arms aching, her breath quick. It's impossible, she said, setting the bowl down. The water returns faster than I can remove it. The hermit stepped closer. His voice was soft, yet it filled the chamber like wind through leaves. You are trying too hard to empty what was never full. She looked up at him, bewildered. I don't understand. He knelt beside her, dipping his own hand into the basin. Ripples spread, shimmering in the dim light. Your mind, he said, is this basin, always filled with thoughts, fears, memories. You keep trying to empty it by effort, by force. But the more you struggle, the more it refills. He touched the water again, and it stilled instantly, as though his calm had reached it. To truly empty the basin, you must first empty yourself, Lyra whispered. How? The hermit smiled, the kind of smile that carried centuries of patience. Let go. Let go of the wish to control, to understand, to fix. Be here. Feel the water. Feel your breath. Feel this moment, and nothing else. Lyra hesitated. She stared at the basin, at her trembling reflection. Her mind wanted to argue, to grasp, to do, but something in the hermit's voice silenced her thoughts. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and exhaled slowly. The echo of her breath merged with the faint drip of water. For the first time, she stopped thinking about the basin. She stopped thinking about the darkness. She simply existed, listening, feeling, breathing. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time lost its edges. When she finally opened her eyes, she was startled. The basin, though untouched, appeared clearer, lighter, as if its depth had changed. The candle's flame had steadied. The air itself felt softer. The hermit nodded gently. You see, the basin empties when you stop disturbing it. He gestured toward her candle, still burning quietly nearby. Light is not what saves you from darkness, child. It is what helps you see the dark, not to destroy it, but to understand it. Lyra stared at him, her eyes glistening. I've spent my life fearing the night, she whispered, and all along it was waiting to teach me. The hermit placed his hand over her heart. Darkness does not hide truth, it hides noise. When you learn to listen, you will see without light. For a long moment, they sat in silence. The drip of water continued, steady and timeless. The faint glow in the air seemed to pulse with their shared stillness. Then the hermit rose again. Rest now, he said. Tomorrow you will walk deeper, not into the cave, but into yourself. He turned and walked back into the shadows, his form slowly fading until only the sound of his steps remained, and then, even that was gone. Lyra sat beside the basin, her candle flickering softly beside her, and whispered to the darkness, I am not afraid. For the first time in her life, she meant it. Lyra awoke to silence, a silence so deep it felt alive. The candle beside her was little more than a stub, its flame trembling in the soft draught that whispered through the cavern. The hermit was nowhere to be seen. Only the stone basin remained, its water as still as glass, reflecting the pale shimmer of the dying light. For a long while she simply sat there, her thoughts quiet. Something inside her had shifted since the previous night, a stillness she couldn't explain, as if her heart had learned to breathe differently. She remembered the hermit's words, tomorrow, you will walk deeper, not into the cave, but into yourself. She rose, taking the candle in her hand. Its light was weak now, but it was enough to guide her forward. She followed the narrow tunnel that wound deeper into the mountain, where the air grew colder. The walls slick with unseen moisture. The passage twisted and shrank until she had to crouch to continue. The sound of dripping water echoed somewhere ahead, steady and unending. As she descended, the flame began to falter. Each time it flickered, her heart clenched, not from fear, but from a strange, reluctant love. This little flame had been her companion through loneliness, her proof that she was not alone in the dark, her proof that she was not alone in the dark. Now, it was dying. At last, she reached a chamber vast and hollow, larger than any before. The air was heavy, ancient. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, scattered with pebbles that clicked softly as she walked. She held the candle up high. Its light barely reached the nearest wall. Then, with a final sigh, the flame went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Lyra froze. The silence pressed against her from all sides. The air seemed thicker, heavier. She could no longer see her hands, her feet, not even the faintest outline of her own form. The darkness was total. For the first time since she was a child, she stood in a world without light. Panic rose like a tide. Her breathing quickened, her hands trembled. The mind, that restless, endless voice, began to whisper again. What if you never find your way out? What if the hermit left you here to die? Her thoughts grew louder, circling like vultures. The darkness around her seemed to echo them, returning her fears in distorted tones. And then, in the midst of her trembling, she remembered the hermit's voice, calm, unshaken. Darkness does not hide truth. It hides noise. Lyra closed her eyes, though there was no difference, and whispered to herself, be here. Feel the breath. Feel this moment. She inhaled slowly. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet stone. She exhaled, and for a heartbeat, the panic loosened. She sat down on the cold floor, cross-legged like the hermit, and placed her hands on her knees. The darkness became her teacher. At first, all she could feel was fear, the mind's desperate attempt to cling to control. But as the minutes stretched into hours, something began to change. Her other senses awakened. She could hear the dripping of distant water, rhythmic and calm like the heartbeat of the cave. She could feel the texture of the air, how it brushed her face when she moved, how it carried faint vibrations through the stone. She could sense the vastness around her, not by sight, but by presence. Gradually her breathing slowed, her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the dripping water. The fear melted into stillness, the stillness into awareness. And then something extraordinary. In that absolute darkness, her mind began to see, not with eyes, but with understanding. Shapes appeared in her awareness, the curve of the walls, the ripples of the stone, the faint pulse of her own body. It wasn't light, it was clarity. The cave was no longer an enemy. It was alive, vast, patient, breathing with her. For the first time, she realized that the darkness wasn't empty. It was full of quiet, full of meaning, full of life. The darkness had always been there, waiting for her to stop resisting. Tears welled in her eyes, unseen but felt. All this time, she whispered, I was afraid of what was trying to love me. The words hung in the air, echoing gently, and then she felt it. A warmth, subtle at first, blooming from within her chest. Not like fire, but like dawn, gentle, radiant. The warmth spread through her body, illuminating her from within. She opened her eyes, though there was nothing to see, and yet, somehow, the cave was visible in outlines of silver light. Her candle was still dark, but she was glowing. In that moment, she understood. The true flame was never in the wax or the wick. It had always been in her. The cave responded in kind. The walls shimmered faintly as if lit from within, revealing ancient carvings, spirals, stars, and flowing symbols that seemed to move when she looked at them. They told stories of others who had come before her, seekers who had walked the same path. Each symbol whispered one truth: light is not something you find. It is something you remember. Lyra stood, no longer afraid. She walked deeper still, her steps soft, sure, silent. The darkness followed her like a loyal shadow, no longer threatening but protective the way night holds the stars. As she reached the far end of the cavern, she found another basin, smaller than the first. Inside it, the faint reflection of her own glowing form shimmered like liquid moonlight. She touched the surface, and the ripples carried her reflection outward until it disappeared. A voice, gentle, familiar, spoke behind her. You have emptied the basin at last. She turned, and there stood the hermit, smiling. But this time, he was radiant, not as a body of flesh, but as light woven from shadow. His eyes shone with both warmth and distance, like the stars. Lyra bowed deeply. I understand now, she said. To empty the mind is not to lose thought, but to stop being ruled by it. To walk into darkness is to see what the light hides. The hermit nodded. And what is that, child? She smiled faintly. Myself. The hermit's form began to fade, merging with the soft glow of the cave. Then you no longer need me, his voice said, now part of the air itself. When you carry the flame within, the teacher becomes the echo. And with that, he was gone. Lyra stood alone, though she no longer felt alone. She picked up the extinguished candle and held it gently in her palms. Its wick was cold, yet she felt no need to relight it. She had become what she was seeking when she finally stepped out of the cave hours later. The world was drenched in sunrise. The sky burned gold and crimson, and the light touched the land like a blessing. For the first time, she saw not the light itself, but the shadows it created, and she loved them. Equally, she smiled at the dawn and whispered, the darkness was never my enemy. It was my teacher. The mountain was silent when Lyra stepped out of the cave. The air felt different now, lighter, almost tender. The world was bathed in the first blush of dawn, the horizon unfolding in hues of rose and amber. The valley below shimmered with mist, and every blade of grass sparkled as if dusted with diamonds. She had walked into the cave with a candle in her hand. She emerged from it carrying a light no wind could touch. Lyra stood for a long time at the mouth of the cave, breathing deeply. The cold air filled her lungs, but it no longer stung. It felt alive, like the breath of the earth itself. She looked back once into the darkness behind her, that vast, silent teacher, and whispered, thank you. Then she began her descent. Each step down the winding trail seemed different from the one before. The same stones, the same trees, the same streams, yet all of it new. Where once she had hurried, anxious to reach her goal, she now walked slowly, reverently. She noticed how sunlight played on the snow. She heard the small sounds of life, the chirp of unseen birds, the rustle of wind through leaves, the faint hum of insects stirring with morning. The world had not changed. She had. By the time she reached the valley floor, the sun had risen high, painting the fields in soft gold. Farmers were already at work, their shouts echoing faintly across the hills. The smell of fresh bread and smoke drifted through the air. When she entered the village, people stopped and stared. That it wasn't her worn clothes or the dust of the mountain on her hands, it was something else. There was a calmness about her, a quiet certainty that made even the most restless eyes pause. Children stopped chasing their hoops. Old women hushed mid-conversation. Even the dogs seemed to sense it, wagging their tails gently but keeping their distance, as if greeting something sacred. One of the villagers, a man she had known since childhood, approached her cautiously. Lyra, he asked, you've returned. We thought you lost. Where have you been? Lyra smiled softly. I was lost, she said, but now I am found. The man frowned. Found what? Gold? A treasure? She shook her head. something far more precious, a silence beneath thought. Far more precious, a silence beneath thought. The villagers exchanged puzzled glances. Some smiled politely, others whispered. One of the elders stepped forward, a gray-haired woman who had once told the tale of the hermit to the children by the fire. Her eyes, sharp and kind, studied Lyra carefully. "You went to the cave," she said quietly. "Did you find him?" Lyra hesitated. "Yes and no. I found the teacher, but not in the way I expected. He was a mirror more than a man." The elder nodded slowly, as if she understood. "And what did the mirror show you?" Lyra's gaze drifted toward the rising sun. "That what we call light and darkness are not enemies. They are two breaths of the same being." The elder smiled faintly, and for a moment, there was no need for more words. Days turned into weeks. Lyra returned to her old cottage on the edge of the field. But though she resumed the same chores, fetching water, tending the garden, mending clothes, something in her presence changed the rhythm of life around her. When she spoke, people listened differently. When she was silent, they felt calm. Children who once feared the night began to visit her after dusk, sitting quietly by the fire as she told stories, not of monsters or heroes, but of stillness, breath, and listening. She taught them how to watch the candle flame without naming it, how to listen to the wind without thinking of where it came from. She showed them that peace wasn't something hidden on mountaintops, it was right here, in the way a drop of water falls, in the space between heartbeats. Some villagers laughed at her teachings. "It's just air and silence," they said. But others began to notice small miracles, crops growing stronger where she walked, children sleeping peacefully after hearing her stories, quarrels softening when she entered a room. They began to call her the Lightkeeper. One evening, as twilight draped the village, a storm rolled in from the hills. The sky turned black, thunder rumbling through the air. The power of nature frightened the villagers. They barred their doors and shut their windows. Lyra, however, stepped outside. Rain soaked her clothes. Lightning flashed across the fields, yet she stood still, her face lifted toward the sky. She whispered, "This, too, is light." When the storm passed, she returned to her hearth and lit a single candle. Villagers gathered outside her window, drawn by curiosity. Through the glow of the small flame, they saw her sitting calmly, eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. The entire village seemed quieter that night. Even the wind gentled its breath. A child called through the window, "Lyra, aren't you afraid when it's dark?" She opened her eyes and looked at him with warmth. "No," she said softly, "because darkness is not what you think. Close your eyes, and you will see it. It is not emptiness, it is the cradle of all light." The boy frowned, then closed his eyes, perhaps for the first time without fear. The world inside was vast and peaceful. Years passed. Seasons changed. The legend of the Lightkeeper spread beyond the hills of the woman who had entered the cave with a candle and returned carrying the dawn inside her heart. Pilgrims began to visit her, seeking wisdom. To each she said the same thing: if you wish to find light, stop searching for it. Sit still and listen. When the noise fades, what remains, that is the flame. As she grew older, her hair turned silver like moonlight, her eyes softer but brighter than ever. She no longer needed a candle. Wherever she sat, the space seemed subtly illuminated, not by light, but by presence. And one morning, when the first rays of sunrise touched her face, she took her final breath, gentle, peaceful, complete. The villagers found her sitting as if in meditation, a faint smile still on her lips. Beside her was an unlit candle, the same one she had carried into the cave years before. They buried her beneath the great oak on the hill. At night, when the wind blew through its leaves, the sound was like a whisper, "Be still." And sometimes, only sometimes, travelers passing by would see a faint glow around that tree, like the shimmer of dawn before the sun. They said it was the spirit of the Lightkeeper, still guiding those who feared the dark. But those who truly listened understood it wasn't her spirit. It was the darkness itself, remembering her. Stood still beneath it all. Her face turned upward, eyes open to the storm. Each drop that struck her skin felt like a word in an ancient language, wild, pure, alive. She did not flinch when thunder split the air. She did not run when the wind tore at her shore. Instead, she whispered, "You too are part of the song." As the storm raged, a few villagers peeked from their windows. They saw her standing in the rain, her figure calm amid the chaos, the lightning reflecting faintly in her eyes. There was no fear in her, only reverence. And then, as quickly as it had come, the storm began to fade. The thunder rolled farther away. The rain softened to a whisper. A hush fell over the valley, a hush so complete that the world seemed reborn. Lyra raised her hands, catching the last drops of rain in her palms. When she looked down, the water shimmered faintly with light. her own inner glow reflected in the rippling surface. From that night on, something changed in the valley. Children no longer feared the dark. They would gather outside at night to listen to the quiet hum of crickets and the rustle of wind through the wheat. Old men stopped hurrying home before sunset. They began to linger under the stars, telling stories that no longer needed a fire to feel warm. Even the candles in the cottages burned slower, gentler, as if they too had learned not to struggle against the night. And Lyra, the lightkeeper, would sometimes walk the paths after dusk with no lantern at all. Her presence alone was enough. Those who met her eyes often said it felt like looking into still water, under moonlight, clear, deep, and strangely familiar, as though they were seeing not her reflection, but their own hidden calm. When travelers passed through the valley and asked who she was, the villagers would answer simply, "She is the one who went into the mountain and brought back the dawn." Years passed. The old traveler who once spoke of the hermit returned briefly before moving on again. When he saw Lyra sitting by the fields at twilight, he bowed low and said, "You found him?" She smiled. "No," she said softly. "I remembered him." He chuckled. "Then you are wiser than most." Lyra shook her head. "Not wise, just quiet." And when the traveler departed, he carried her story with him, retelling it in faraway villages where children feared the dark and old men forgot the stars. Each time he told it, he ended the same way. She went into darkness to find light, and discovered that they were never apart. Many seasons later, when Lyra's hair had turned silver and her steps had slowed, she often sat outside her cottage as dusk fell, not to light candles, but to watch the first star appear. Sometimes young villagers would come and ask her lightkeeper, "What did the darkness truly teach you?" She would smile, gaze at the sky, and answer, that darkness is not the absence of light, it is the space where light learns to breathe. And as the night deepened, her calm voice would fade into the wind, carrying its quiet wisdom across the valley to the fields, the rivers, the mountains, and the hearts of all who listened.